You make a bunch of noise out here, so they have peace and quiet in here. Because there's no better sound than the squeak-free guarantee from Advantech Subflooring and Advantech Subfloor Adhesive.
I'm Jake Bruton, and welcome to the UnBuild It podcast. And today I am joined by one of my regular co-hosts. That would be Peter Yost.
Happy to be here.
I feel like he's faking that, and that he just said that out of habit, and that maybe this is not where he wants to be, and he would rather be retired on some island somewhere instead of here. But we'll take it.
Okay, and on that note...
He's waning very quickly out of this existence for some reason today. Sorry. And
Nikki.
Yes, and there we go. We are also joined by Nikki Krueger.
Hello.
Thank you for joining us.
Absolutely.
Nikki has been a guest on the podcast before, so just quickly to reintroduce Nikki. Nikki Krueger is with Santa Fe. And is it Santa Fe Dehumidifiers? Or is it just Santa Fe?
Santa Fe Indoor Air Quality is supposed to, is the official, but it is mostly dehumidifiers.
Okay. And so we have Nikki back to a couple questions, one of Peter's questions, but we'll get to that in a second.
Sure.
And I thought I would start by reading a question that we got from a listener, and then we'll go from there. And I think this is indicative of some of the way that people's understanding works. So this questions at UnBuild It Podcast, if you want to send in one of your questions. Hi, UnBuild It crew. That's you, me, and Steve. I think that's all three of us. Mm-hmm. I am still grasping the concept of building science and started reading more about it. Is stopping airflow in a house good for controlling humidity when you're in a tropical climate? That's the entire question. So anything that gets inferred before you start trying to pick apart the question, because I saw your head turn and how quick you wanted to jump on me about, well, what are we... Just before you dive in and start trying to beat me up over someone's question, and thank you for sending your question in, that's the entire question. So... before we attempt to answer any of this question, there are a couple things that we need to talk about, right? We're talking about relative humidity. There's always moisture in the air. We're talking about, I love the fact that the question actually says, like, I'm starting to understand building science, because this is like the best starting point for, like, moisture is the problem that we always discuss. It's why Nikki has a job, because she's here to teach people about moisture and the challenges. Yes, and that's why we invited her instead of somebody else. And so I thought that we would start with the idea, you were telling me about trying to sell your guys' house, and I wanted you to retell that very quickly about you guys including in your listing that there's a dehumidifier.
Yeah, so, well, and actually they came in and looked at the house, and the lady made an offer, but then she wanted a home inspection done the next day. And basically there was just two small things that they found in the home inspection, but her biggest concern was, and even the home inspector, is why we had a dehumidifier going in the basement. There must have been a problem. Why do you have it going? And the reason we have a dehumidifier is to prevent a problem. And I guess growing up in the Midwest, everybody had dehumidifiers in their basement. It was just something you automatically did. I assumed in Northern Virginia, people just automatically had dehumidifiers in their basement. I mean, it's a space below ground. It's a cooler space, so the relative humidity is always going to be higher in a cooler space. And so I don't know if she kept on going back to it, and she was outbid anyway, so it doesn't really matter. We didn't have to go any further, but
so even just from there is absolutely nothing wrong with the building. If the downstairs, because it's below grade, is 4 or 5 degrees cooler than the above grade space, when you go down those stairs, it's going to feel more damp because the RH is going to feel higher, or it's going to be higher because of the temperature drop. That's just the way the physics of the building works, and so by putting the dehum down there, we're going to reduce that a little bit, and it's going to make the whole building feel just a little bit more comfortable, even if there's not a problem in the space. I will grant, the only reason I had a dehum at my last house in the basement is because it always had a little bit of moisture getting in somewhere. I didn't build it, so before there's any comments out of either one of you, it was built in 1965 before I was born, and when Peter was 7, 10. Were you 10 in 1965? What year were you born?
1955.
Okay, you were 10.
Thanks for helping
I
me with
nailed
the math.
the math. But like, it's interesting that the building inspector was like on her side too, or the home inspector was on her side too.
Yeah.
I mean, I understand it. The majority of home inspectors come from the insurance world, not from the building world, and so like it doesn't take much being on our side of the table, Peter and I's side of the table, to go, yeah, the home inspectors generally don't know what the hell they're talking about anyway. No offense. I realize there are some home inspectors that listen. We're not talking about you. We're talking about other people. But that's how complicated.
They're driven by the insurance side?
No, they come from the insurance adjuster world, and they
really?
end up leaving that. I read a thing a few years ago that it was like more than half of the people who are registered with whatever the Association for National Home Inspectors.
Yeah, NASHI and
Yeah. Had come from being insurance adjusters first, because it's like that insurance adjuster world, you get trained in that world, and the conglomerate that you work for, like State Farm or whoever that big company is, once you're trained in that world, you very quickly can just apply and get your license and then be a private contractor and not work in that world and be self-employed. So it's an easy transition. And when I heard that, I was on a project that I was looking at a reno for some people that were buying a house. And I said, hey, I just read this thing. And he went, yeah, me and the guy that worked for me, we were both insurance adjusters at Shelter, and Shelter's based in Columbia, Missouri. He was like, at Shelter Insurance before we started doing this. And I was just like, well, there's 100% of the people that I know that are like.
Well, it's interesting because if you're coming from the insurance world, they don't cover mold claims in homes.
Yeah.
So even all the more reason
to understand
and have a dehumidifier in your basement for that. And so that surprised me when you said that, because I would have thought that they understood that. But yeah, I think also when you go down those stairs into a basement, one of the things that is very common when you ask people to even describe a basement, but is a musty smell.
Yep.
And musty usually means that there's microbial growth down there somewhere, and that's what's giving off that odor. So you might not see it. It might not even be something substantial. It could be that you've got a cardboard box sitting on the cement floor, and underneath there you've got it happening. But yeah, I mean, to me, it's just you put a dehumidifier in a basement.
I may be misattributing this, but I think I've been attributing this to your brother Nathan, Peter, for a long time. Your nose knows. I think Nathan is the one that told me that the first time.
He has a more sensitive nose than the average person, if that's what you mean.
No, like he just said, like,
yeah,
your nose knows. If it smells funky, it's because it is funky. And the first time I heard him say that, I was just like, oh man, that's so smart. And like, I've used that once a month for the last 5 years since he told me that.
Well, and I think part of the problem is that you can go into a basement, and having done this a number of times, and there's no visible signs of liquid moisture, but that doesn't mean that moisture moving through that assembly, because it's not perfectly moisture protected, and it can hold a lot of moisture, and when it sees enough heat at the interior surface of that wall, it evaporates. So there's a very slow moisture pump, right? There's moisture coming from the soil, it's making its way through the concrete, evaporates into the space. You have to deal with that moisture even though you can't see it.
Yeah.
And so we have a really strong history of needing to dehumidify that space. And in part because we kind of talked about this a bit before, when did the basement or the cellar move from, a space where we wanted to have damp, cool conditions because we kept vegetables and things down there, to a space that we want to have fully conditioned. And that transition has been a painful one. But the way to deal with that is to have a dehumidifier.
Is that transition the advent of the walkout basement?
We have a walkout basement. This home was built in 2005. And in the summer, we run a dehumidifier all summer long. It's not running continuously, but there is moisture making its way through those 3 walls that are below grade, and a Santa Fe 90, Advanced 70 does a perfect job.
Hashtag not sponsored.
No, and it's the compact 70.
It's the compact 70.
Nikki knows which one he owns.
I'm just doing a great thing with names of late. But anyway, it perfectly manages that moisture load that is not going to take care of itself,
Yeah.
even with a walkout on one side.
Well, and if you're using, again, you have air conditioning typically in that house, and what I found is most of the time that air conditioning is conditioning the basement and the first floor. So you're pumping cooler air into a space that probably doesn't need it because it's
Yeah.
comfortable anyway.
Well, we have 2 zones, and the one zone is in the basement, but because it's cooler down there, the air conditioning doesn't run, which means we need to have
Yep.
a separate dehumidification system because it's not going to get taken care of by the cooling.
And about 50% of that air that's below the home, whether it's a crawl space or basement, makes its way into the living space. So again, those musty odors, they're making its way up into those upper, and not even just that, but any other indoor air quality contaminants as well.
And I must add, we have absolutely no odors in that basement, but that doesn't mean that there's not moisture moving through that assembly into the space. It's just, that's the way it is.
So if we come back to the question, I think we're gonna have to infer some things here. Is stopping airflow in a house good for controlling humidity? Is the first part of the question. I think we can assume that he is asking airflow through the wall, through the assembly. In other words, airflow from outside to inside.
Air leakage.
Yeah. Or vice versa.
Yeah.
So, yes, because anytime we have control and we keep the air that we've invested in inside, we can dehumidify, we can temper, we can refilter, right?
Well, I think it's interesting as a tropical climate because you would think, well,
I was peeling that part out to start out with because
Oh.
my answer applies to all climates to start out with, right?
okay,
Like
that's good.
if we have a low leakage home, a good ACH 50 home to start out with, we have really decent control. Like I would take really good air leakage numbers over really good insulation numbers any day of the week,
Granted.
because then I have really good control from that aspect.
I think inherent to this too is that the number of climates we have in all of the United States where you pretty much can have your windows open more than 50% of the year, right? That's a pretty small segment of our climates. But that is the one climate where keeping the inside, and the outside, that's not your goal. Your goal is for 50% of the year to have the outside in all the time, right? Because it's dry and it's relatively mild temperatures. But we have plenty of places, 1A, 2A, 3A, 4A in terms of climate zones where, you want an airtight house because you're using that airtightness not only to manage energy flow, but moisture as well. So,
Well, I think it's read that first part again.
Is stopping airflow in a house good for controlling humidity?
So the interesting thing about that, because I work with a lot of builders and a lot of multifamily developers even, and they said, their comment is often, we never had moisture problems until you made us tighten our homes.
Yeah.
that's the
And so you're making us have moisture problems because you're requiring us to hit, these air tightness levels now. And the reality is well, you just had infiltration and your AC ran
Ran
all
nonstop.
the time, and we weren't controlling. We had, which means poor indoor air quality, because when you're not controlling where the air is coming from, and like you said, now when you tighten it up, you can at least control that air. You know where it's coming from. You can filter it, you condition it, and you can distribute it throughout the home, which often helps hopefully eliminate, hot spots and cool spots and all of that other stuff. But it is a very common statement that you hear when you start tightening stuff up, is that we're causing those problems now by requiring those air tightness.
And it's true.
Yeah.
Like, it is the natural consequence. But the other part of that is we get higher levels of comfort and substantially lower
Absolutely.
bills. So that's what we're looking for.
Yep.
Somewhere I heard somebody say manage energy and moisture with equal intensity. I don't.
We get to hear Pete's mantra. I'm glad that this is the second time you've been on the podcast and you've made it through at least one without getting to sit through his mantra. And so in tropical climate you touched on, like, there is higher humidity there, so it is more of an issue.
And the thermodynamics of how that tropical climate is working, right? So when you've got hot trying to go to cold, so you got the outside constantly trying to get in, and wet going to dry, it's just all the forces on the outside are just constantly trying to get in that home. So you've got to try to air seal as much as possible, especially to stop any of those condensation points in the walls.
And that air leakage is going to be much more of a problem for condensation than any vapor drive is ever going to be an issue. Isn't it like tenfold that air leakage will bring moisture with it over vapor drive? Or is it 100-fold? I forget which one it is.
It's significant.
It's not even an issue, like, comparatively.
Yeah,
right?
that thought experiment that Joe Stieberg did with a 1-inch square hole in Chicago in the winter, and it was about 90 times greater.
I think it's a third of a gallon to 33 gallons or something like that, where it's like, okay, we're not worried about vapor drive in that instance. We're worried about air leakage carrying.
It is interesting, though, that if you look at the psychrometric chart, where are the lines the steepest? It's in the high humidity, high temperature. So the vapor pressure difference, in really hot climates that's a greater difference than if you slide all the way down to the cold part of the chart. So there's more push. There's more vapor pressure difference in hot, humid climates than there is in, cold, dry, for sure.
It's kind of the other part of that, though, is the tighter we build, now we got to start thinking about the moisture we're trapping inside from, showering and cooking and cleaning and breathing. And then we also now need mechanical ventilation to help bring in that outdoor air. So, it is always one of those kind of like no good deed goes unpunished, but we just need to rethink about how we're designing our systems and the expectations of those systems. And then most importantly, the wild card of how people are going to operate those systems in the house. Because that's always, the crapshoot is, what I like the thermostat set at is very different than what my husband likes the thermostat at. And if you start going into senior communities where, we've done a lot of work because they want this thermostat set at 78 or 80 degrees. Mm-hmm. And we're just not getting that runtime of the largest system in the house to remove the moisture that it needs to, because from a temperature standpoint, we don't need it. And that's what it runs on. You'll
get a kick out of this, Nikki. I had a rash of tiny house consultations for moisture problems.
They caused a rash?
We don't have a solution for that, Peter. I'm sorry.
Well, it was so funny because
I have an ointment.
The volume of air is so small, they're built really tight, and a lot of hard surfaces. So the moisture flywheel, like vapor moving in and out of building materials, drywall, wood, it's all hard surfaces, like a mobile home. So I said, well, how much water do you think one human being and a dog would generate overnight?
Which is all tiny home people, a human being and
a dog. Anyway, I said at one of their conferences when they asked me to present on moisture, I had like a half a cup and a pint and a quart of water. I said, which one of these do you think represents the respiration of a dog and a person overnight? And it didn't matter because I never got invited back to that tiny house conference ever again. Like, get rid of that guy.
Yeah.
So I did some stuff with the folks at Havelock a couple years ago They make sheep's wool insulation.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And they were telling me that one of their biggest markets were the van life people. And I was like, really? And they go, yeah, because when you close all the windows and doors and then you sleep in it and it's cold outside, the metal can that you're sleeping in sweats like crazy and it ruins insulation very quickly, but not wool. And I was like, oh, yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Huh. That's why you can wear a good wool sweater
And it gets soaking wet with sweat every day of the year and it not bother it.
Interesting.
And I'd never crossed my mind before. That's a complete and total aside for what we're... But.
Yeah, I was going to say, I was not expecting this.
Yeah. So you had a...
I do. So I get asked this a lot. Okay. So I can walk into a big box store and I can buy an upright, portable Energy Star dehumidifier for around $250 to $300. And then I tell folks, yeah, but they're probably not going to do the job for you. There's this other group of dehumidifiers, and they're all more than $1,000, but they do a much better job and they're much more efficient. And the question is it true that there is only these like two groups? And if it is true that we have this one option, which is going to Lowe's and picking up a small upright Energy Star dehumidifier portable, or a system that's designed to serve better and a larger space, is that what we have?
Well, it is pretty much. So you've got the portable category, which again, that price can range from a couple $100 all the way up to, $1,000 plus, even in the portable category. And then you've got the whole house ducted. And, I was just on this conversation on LinkedIn because, people are, can't I just put a portable...
Because Nikki's a professional. That's why she was on LinkedIn.
Oh, my word.
Yes,
Go ahead.
I had to throw that out there. But if I just put a portable in my laundry, won't that just take care of the humidity in my entire house? Well, maybe it will. You should be monitoring, your home. But it's like using a portable air conditioner to treat your entire house.
Yeah.
Is it going to be effective in the laundry room at the other end of the house when you have a master bedroom with an ensuite, which always typically I get calls about having moisture issues. People say, well, it's got a built-in condensate pump, so I can just kind of set it anywhere. Well, we don't put condensate pumps in our dehumidifiers. We've looked into it, but it's not, if they're going to fail, it's when they're going to fail. So when your whole dehumidifier
Like the ones
is
in
down,
my mini splits already have.
then it goes down because of the condensate. You're not going to be happy about that. But we're made in Madison, Wisconsin. Not a lot of those. I don't even know if there's any portables that are actually made in the U.S. anymore. And then I think the best quote that I ever got about our dehumidifier was not your first, but your last, because I think people do need to go through a series of buying those
learning
portables.
process.
Yeah.
Where they said they had a dehumidifier graveyard basically in their basement. 1 to 2 year warranty. Ours is a 6-year with a 5-year full replacement. If you call, you're going to get somebody in Madison, Wisconsin. We manufacture restoration equipment also. So when there's a hurricane or a water loss, and you've got the restoration professional wheeling in that those same components are used in our residential dehumidifiers. So we can operate at cooler temperatures and be very effective at removing a large amount of water, where a lot of times those portables, when you start putting them in those cooler spaces and you turn them on, they very easily can start icing up.
Yeah, for sure.
Being able, like if electricity goes out, is it going to automatically come back on? A lot of times those won't. You have to go back on, turn them back on. They don't have good filtration. So they have their places, and there's, depending on your budget, it might be the best solution. But when it comes to the whole house, our expectations as homeowners are, we want to enter our homes, and we call it kind of the San Diego effect. We want it 74 degrees and 50% humidity all the time. Mm-hmm. And we don't want to think about it in those, in the spring, summer, and fall. We have the expectations. I don't want a portable in my brand new house that I'm gonna have to empty a bucket, or I have a line of condensate running. They want this magical HVAC system to just, make their homes healthy and comfortable and protect their property all the time. So that's where a whole home unit really comes in. It's just part of your system. It's, it's that
It's on the thermostat, the same as anything else.
Yeah, it's that
taken care of.
HVACD. Like, I can dial it in to a relative humidity, and I know that if the AC doesn't run long enough to satisfy that, the dehumidifier is going to come on, and we're good. And I don't have to think about it.
Yeah.
So I have a story for you. You and I haven't talked about this yet. We moved into our house and it wasn't finished, as any good builder would do, not finish the house before they move.
It's kind of a trademark, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. You'll see, Nikki. You're building a house.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
You're in the middle of getting ready to move in one before it's finished. And the laundry room still has a folding table instead of cabinets, and it didn't have a door on it until very
Laundry
recently.
rooms can have something other than folding tables?
Yeah, see?
Who knew?
I don't know that yet. It still has a folding table, but I put a door on it. And the laundry room has a 5-foot wide opening, and I put a 5-foot wide barn door on it. And we put a solid core door on it so that you can't really hear the equipment inside and everything. And it took me a long time to find the hardware that I wanted. It's hidden barn door hardware, so like it looks like the door just magically moves back and forth. It's from an Italian company. It's called Magic 2 is the company, or is the barn hardware. Effectively, it's rollers in the bottom of the door and then a catchment that keeps it from folding away from the wall. But we mounted the door on a Friday. I spent Saturday and Sunday hanging out with my family, and then I left to go, I think, to IBS, to the Builder Show in Vegas. And then my wife came towards the end of the week to hang out after IBS, and we were going to like spend the weekend in Vegas. And the first thing she said to me when she got to Vegas was, our laundry room is super humid now. Because for the 3.5 years that we'd lived there prior to that, there's not been a door. And I was like, crap. Like,
Yep.
And then she was like, so what are we going to do about that? And I was like, you're not going to like the solution of leave the door open while it's running.
What a beautiful door.
What a great solution. Like, let's just leave the door open. So I haven't resolved it yet. It might end up having a dehumidifier at some point. We're going to have to figure this out.
We've got that, the wall one.
Ah, there we go. Hadn't thought about that.
Yeah, that you can just put right above the. Do you have a drain tub or something like that?
There's our solution.
There's
We
your
have a wall
solution.
mounted
You should
unit.
say a little bit more about the wall unit, because
Yes.
I didn't know about that configuration.
Yeah,
I
stud
think
cavity.
it's super cool.
Yeah, and it can be
forgot about
surfaced.
that.
Yeah, so it's called the MD33.
I totally was not pandering to let Nikki. Go ahead though.
And it's an in-wall dehumidifier, so it'll fit into a 16-inch on center stud wall. And it has a cover on it that kind of looks like a bath fan cover. You can paint it. You can. We have some in some high-end yachts where they actually varnished it to be the same color as the
Oh, wow.
cabinets. But basically, it'll dehumidify a space. Really big for multifamily apartments where they have small closets and maybe can't fit in a dehumidifier into the system. So they can put it on in the wall. It also comes with, you can order a surface mount. So we've got a boys' school in Texas where the teachers weren't real happy towards the end of the day how the smells were in the classrooms. And the relative humidity was reading high. So they mounted these the CMU block walls so they can surface mount these as well. But a lot of them in houses with ductless mini splits where you don't have ductwork.
Right.
I think we've got a passive house in Dallas down here that used them in theirs. It's a great unit if you can't duct a dehumidifier.
And
you will always get better control throughout the house with a ducted unit, but is a great option for just small spaces.
Call it kind of point of use.
Yeah, exactly. And especially if there's a mechanical closet, usually it'll go on the wall right outside the mechanical closet, so you can just run the drain and then plug it in. right there. We've got a lot of them going into basements, especially theater rooms, which kind of surprised me. But there's a
Interesting.
lot of equipment. What
Yeah.
I've been telling people, even in a small space like apartment, or we have Airbnbs using these, where people start, they're quiet, but that's the only thing you hear when it comes on at night. Or if you go in your basement and you've got a movie going and it comes on, but you can plug it into a 15 amp smart plug. So you can get off of Amazon and you can just bring it on your phone and then shut it off. Or in a resort in Corpus Christi, they put one in every one of the resort rooms. We put it on, for lack of a better, like a Christmas tree timer. And what they'll do is they'll over dehumidify during the day when people are running in and out, don't
Watching
care
TV and
the
whatnot.
sound. But then at nighttime, it'll shut off, and then that way, if you drift up a little bit over nighttime, it really isn't a big deal. But
I think Nikki just sold me a dehumidifier.
And it's called,
the Ultra MD33.
but is the number always representative of the pint removal?
That's a really good point. So,
That's a no.
well, it is at 8060. So all dehumidifiers
right.
used to be rated by their capacities by AHAM at 80 degrees
Yeah.
and 60% relative humidity, which is basically an indoor pool
Yeah.
condition.
Yeah.
So, a 70 pint dehumidifier typically is 70 pints at 80 degrees and 60% relative humidity. And
Which is not terribly representative. yeah.
of living spaces at all, especially not basements or crawl spaces. So
Right.
the DOE in 2019 came up with a new standard, one for whole house and one for portable, that are representative of those conditions. So a portable unit is rated at 65 degrees and 60% relative humidity.
65, 60. That's a portable.
That's a portable. And a whole home is 73 degrees and 60% relative humidity. And those are very important to understand because your capacities go down as the temperatures go down.
Right,
So
right.
on all of our units, and we've got this great chart at several different conditions that we share all our performance, because it's really important for a homeowner and a builder and a waterproofer or HVAC professional to know truly how much dehumidification you're getting at those conditions.
Yeah.
So a 70 pint whole home unit, which is basically the same as a 70 pint portable unit for us. One comes with ducts and collars and has a terminal block, but the innards are exactly the same. The whole home unit is 55 pints. That 70 pint goes down to 55 pints at the whole home 7360. It goes down to 40 pints when it's put in a basement or crawl space at 65 degrees.
60,
And,
yeah.
and that's really important because now you've gone from what you think is a 70 pint dehumidifier to a 40. And so to be successful for controlling the humidity, you need to understand those numbers, and you need to make sure that they're being shared with you. So if you take a whole home dehumidifier and place it into a basement or crawl space where even if it has some ducts on it in order to get that air moving, but it's still in that space, it's bringing in air from that space and discharging it in that same space. You need to know what the capacity is. And that is one of the other big things when you're talking about going to get a big box unit is, our portable standalone dehumidifiers have a horizontal configuration similar to our ducted. It's very important to at least put some flex duct on that supply side of that dehumidifier, 5-10 feet,
Just to move it.
and move it away from the front of the dehumidifier.
Otherwise, you'll
because
short circuit.
the sensors are those dehumidistats or humidistats are all located in the front of those units. And what happens is you create a microclimate where the warm, dry air is coming out the back, and it's going to make its way right to that sensor, and then it's going to shut off. So the farthest areas of that space are not getting that
How many
dehumidified
people
air.
duct the? How many people do what you're saying, which is move the supply air out.
I would say from a like an encapsulation crawl space professional, part of our training more and more is talking about that and getting them to do that. Now, if a homeowner puts it in, hopefully they're reading our manuals, fingers crossed, or seeing some of our videos, but that is air movement in that space and what's great is if you've got an area that's maybe compartmentalized, but you've got a doorway or an open way, you can put that flux duct into there. And, again, we can get air moving because air movement is just as important as dehumidification. You got to get that air moving. And a crawl space, we say that, about 55% is where we set that dehumidifier because we don't want to go above 60 anywhere in that crawl space. So if we set it at 55 and hopefully we got some of that duct work going that we're getting air movement, the farthest corners we're not going above 60%. So that really is one of also the big differences between those upright portables that, you've got the sensor and the warm, dry air basically almost
next
right.
It's like designed to shut off.
Yeah, it's short, and that's really hard on dehumidifiers that on and off. Just like an AC
Any
system.
equipment, really.
You want longer
Why do you
run
think they
periods.
originally chose such swimming pool type?
You know what? I
numbers?
don't know. I'm sure there's a history, on why they chose that.
Is it as simple as because the numbers look really good?
Well, my guess is because typically that's where a majority of the dehumidifiers that were being manufactured were being used were
Natatoriums.
more into.
That's interesting because they're
basements.
designed to operate at like 75 degrees Fahrenheit and 80% relative humidity. That's just the standard conditions in a natatorium.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So, but it is important that, you really know the performance more and more in order to be, because, as systems become more designed, we can get down. We were talking about that app that you can use to see how much potential dehumidification you're going to need just based on ventilation. So it is more important as we can get down to designing the details of, okay, I know this is how much moisture I'm going to need to remove based on the people and either the infiltration or the ventilation. Okay, I know that I need 55 pints. Well, that 70-pint dehumidifier for a whole home will give you that 55 pints. But you also always want a little bit more dehumidification than maybe you think. Or if you're, we also are very conservative in our sizing based on square footage. It's an easy way to do it. And if you take, let's say our 70-pint dehumidifier, we say about 1,800 square feet for, 8 to 10 foot ceilings.
So I just want to let listeners know that we're going to put some screenshots of the two apps that Nick and I were talking about because they're really helpful in understanding the relationship between air temperature and percent relative humidity and then dew point and vapor pressure. And sometimes you don't need that information, but it's good to know because it's counterintuitive as to how they change. And so we'll put those apps in our resources, but we'll also have some screenshots of what they look like because I use it all the time.
Yeah, it's very, and just knowing dew point, those apps just to figure out what the dew point is because, as your temperature changes throughout the day and your relative humidity changes throughout the day, the actual amount of water in the air probably isn't changing.
Yeah.
Man, you guys are dorks.
We are.
Gosh.
We are. It's
We're
why
gonna-
we feel so endeared to each other.
Yeah, we're going to leave it at that. Outside of the fact that I'm going to go ahead and call dibs on Dehumidifier Graveyard as a band name at some point. Nikki said that earlier.
You can make it-
That really
I wrote
jumps
that
out.
in my notes.
Dehumidifier Graveyard.
Dibs. You heard it here first. Nikki, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nikki.
Yeah, I
Pete,
appreciate it.
thank you for being here as well.
My pleasure.
Till next time, have a good day.
See ya.